There are places in this world where human ambition and raw necessity converge, where the sheer scale of what men attempt takes the breath away and leaves the observer standing in silence, searching for words large enough to hold the moment. In the arid high desert of Washington state, on a broad bend in the Great Columbia River, one such place exists. A wall of concrete stretches nearly a mile wide. Water pours over its spillway in a curtain so vast, so loud, so elemental, that it seems to belong to some other era of the earth. This is Grand Coulee Dam, and the story of how it came to be is the story of America itself, its hunger, its determination, its genius, and its capacity for both extraordinary achievement and irreversible loss. By the early 20th century, central Washington was thirsty. The Columbia River ran rich and cold through a canyon carved across millennia by ancient glacial floods so massive they reshaped the face of the continent. But the plateau above sat dry and stubborn, baking under a relentless sun. Farmers and dreamers looked down at that river and saw salvation. If only the water could be lifted. If only the power could be harnessed. For decades, the idea of a great dam at the Grand Coulee sat just beyond reach, fought over by competing factions, dismissed by distant politicians, and laughed off by skeptics who doubted the very ground could hold such a structure. Two camps formed in the 1920s, and their conflict was fierce. The pumpers wanted a high dam and hydroelectric power to lift water onto the plateau. The ditchers preferred a gravity canal from a different river entirely, and had powerful allies in the Washington Water and Power Company, which held its own interests in the region's electricity. The debate grew ugly. Opponents planted rumors in the newspapers that the canyon floor held nothing but clay, no granite, no foundation worthy of a great dam. That lie was eventually disproved by drill cores ordered by the Bureau of Reclamation. But the delay cost years, and the dream nearly died in committee rooms and editorial pages far from the Columbia's banks. Then the Great Depression arrived, and everything changed. Men were idle, fields were failing. The nation needed work, and it needed power. Franklin Roosevelt took office in March of 1933, and he carried with him a conviction that great public works could heal a wounded country. He needed the Columbia River. That July, 3,000 people gathered and watched as the first stake was driven into the canyon earth. Construction had begun, though not yet on the dam the visionaries had imagined. Roosevelt, uneasy with the $450 million price of a high dam, initially approved only a lower structure, 290 feet tall. It would generate electricity but could never lift water to the plateau. The irrigationists were not satisfied, but the work had started, and no one believed it would stay small for long. In August of 1934, Roosevelt himself visited the construction site. He stood among the workers. He watched the earth move. He spoke to the crowd, closing with words both simple and resolute. "I leave here today with the feeling that this work is well undertaken," he said, "and we are going to see it through for the benefit of our country." Within months, the Bureau of Reclamation was authorized to proceed with the high dam. By June of 1935, Congress had formally approved it under the Rivers and Harbors Act. The dam that would rise in that canyon would stand 550 feet tall. Nothing like it had ever been built in the United States, and it would not come easily. The challenges were immense, technical, and at times almost overwhelming. The Columbia was powerful and deeply unpredictable. To build in its path, engineers designed massive cofferdams, walls running parallel to the riverbanks, that allowed the river to keep flowing through the center while workers slowly dried out sections of the canyon floor and began digging toward bedrock. 22 million cubic yards of rock and soil had to be excavated. Landslides threatened progress. Ground shifted. In places where the earth refused to stay still, engineers resorted to a solution as ingenious as it was unusual. They froze the ground itself, pumping refrigerated liquid through iron pipes driven into the unstable mass, locking the earth solid so that excavation could continue safely beneath it. Pouring the concrete brought its own crisis. Concrete generates heat as it cures, and in a structure this size, ultimately requiring 12 million cubic yards of the material, the heat could crack the dam from within before it ever held back a drop of water. To prevent this, engineers embedded nearly 2,000 miles of thin pipe throughout the forms. Cold water pumped continuously from the river drew the heat outward, cooling the concrete from the inside. The dam contracted 8 full inches in the process. The resulting gaps were filled with grout, sealing the structure. It was engineering practiced at a scale and precision the world had rarely seen. A consortium of 3 companies, known as MWA, won the initial construction contract for just over $29 million, beating out a competing bid from 6 companies, the same firm that had just completed Hoover Dam. Eventually, the 2 consortiums merged into Consolidated Builders, Inc. to tackle the high dam together. Around 8,000 workers labored at the site across the construction years. They earned roughly 80 cents an hour. They lived in company towns carved into the canyon walls, Mason City on one side, Engineers Town on the other, communities with hospitals, post offices, and 3-bedroom houses rented for $32 a month. They worked in heat and cold, in noise and dust and danger. 77 of them did not survive to see the dam completed. On December 15, 1935, Governor Clarence Martin presided over the ceremonial first concrete pour. A year later, on December 15, 1936, the Columbia River was diverted through the new foundation. Word spread across the region, and people drove from hundreds of miles away simply to stand at the canyon rim and look at a riverbed exposed to open air for the first time in memory. Then on June 1, 1942, water crested the spillway for the first time. The reservoir, named Lake Roosevelt in honor of the president who had willed the dam into being, was full. The dam was complete. By then, the nation was at war. Grand Coulee's power stations came online just as the Pacific Theater was fully engaged, and the electricity they generated became a strategic asset unlike any other. The dam powered aluminum smelters in Longview and Vancouver. It lit the Boeing aircraft factories in Seattle. It energized the shipyards of Portland, and quietly, without public announcement of any kind, it powered the plutonium production facilities at Hanford, Washington, the Hanford site, part of the Manhattan Project, the secret effort to build the atomic bomb. The demand for power there was so urgent that in 1943, 2 generators originally destined for Shasta Dam in California were rerouted to Grand Coulee just to accelerate the installation schedule. The dam did not know what it powered, but it powered it nonetheless, and the war was shaped in part by what rose from that canyon in Washington state. In the decades that followed, the dam kept growing. Between 1967 and 1974, a 3rd powerhouse was added, a massive structure designed in part by architect Marcel Breuer, extending the dam to nearly a mile in total length. 6 of the largest hydroelectric generators ever built were installed. 3 units produced 600 megawatts each. 3 produced 700 megawatts, later upgraded to 805 by Siemens. The competition that partly drove this expansion was geopolitical. The Soviet Union had installed generators on the Volga and Yenisei rivers that exceeded Grand Coulee's original capacity, and American pride demanded a response. When international bidding was opened, the Soviets expressed interest in the contract. The Department of the Interior quietly closed the bidding to foreign companies. Today, Grand Coulee stands as the largest power station in the United States, with a nameplate capacity of 6,809 megawatts. Its reservoir feeds irrigation water to 670,000 acres of farmland across central Washington. Over 60 different crops grow where desert once sat silent beneath the sun. And yet, the full accounting of Grand Coulee cannot be written only in kilowatts and crop yields. The reservoir swallowed more than 21,000 acres of land where native peoples had lived, fished, and buried their dead for thousands of years. 11 towns were submerged. 3,000 people were displaced. The Colville and Spokane tribes lost their homes, their lands, and something far harder to replace. Their sacred fishing grounds at Kettle Falls, where more than 600,000 salmon had been harvested each year, where the great June hog Chinook, fish that sometimes weighed over 80 pounds, had returned season after season, were swallowed by the rising reservoir. In June of 1940, tribal members gathered at Kettle Falls for what they called the Ceremony of Tears. They held it knowing the falls would soon be gone. Within a year, the water had covered them completely. The dam was built without a fish ladder. It remains without one. The salmon do not return. The ceremonies have not been held since 1940. Woody Guthrie understood something about all of this. Hired for 1 month in 1941 to write songs for a documentary about the Columbia River dams, paid just over $266 for his work, he toured the Northwest and was moved beyond his own expectations. In 30 days, he wrote 26 songs, among them Roll On, Columbia, Roll On, Pastures of Plenty, and Grand Coulee Dam. He caught the contradictions the dam embodied, its enormous power and its enormous cost, its promise and its wound. Grand Coulee Dam still stands. It still generates. It still irrigates. The Bureau of Reclamation expects its revenues to fully repay construction costs by 2024, more than a century after the first stake was driven into that canyon earth. It is, by almost any measure, one of the most consequential engineering achievements in American history, and it is a reminder that the mightiest structures we build carry within them the full weight of human complexity, the brilliance and the sacrifice, the promise kept and the promise broken, the river harnessed and the river mourned. If you found this history worth knowing, subscribe for more stories of human ambition in steel, stone, and concrete.